I have been asked to speak about my experience over what has now been quite a long career, about what influenced me and what lessons I have learnt over the year. As I thought about this slightly daunting brief, it did make me reflect on those experiences. What went well, what didn't, and what made the difference. It also made me think about what is success. I consider that I've been personally successful in many ways. I have a close and loving family. I rose to the top echelons in my profession. I'm financially comfortable. I also get to live in one of the best places on earth. I left workplaces in better shape than when I found them, and probably more significantly, I was able to create a positive and enduring culture based on strong values. When I retired from Brisbane Airport, one of the most memorable and rewarding comments from my board was they wanted to ensure that the culture that I had created there was continued, and that this would be an important consideration when they recruited my replacement. So, no pressure, Julieanne, wherever you are. I believe that strong values and continually striving to live those values were the core of my achievements, both personally and professionally. And these values were a legacy of my early upbringing and the examples in front of me as I grew up. It was a pretty modest start. Those of you who know Hendra back in the 70s, stables, fibro houses and race courses in the road each morning. I still remember my nana used to go out and pick up the horse droppings, which was terrible embarrassment to us all, but we had great roses. We were across the road from the old Brisbane Airport before it moved further south, down towards the bay. So I reckon I got the whiff of avgas in my blood from a very early age. And those young women from St Columban's will know that they don't use avgas anymore. It's all Jet A1, but back in those days, it was Kero. We were a pretty happy but not very well-off family. Neither mum or dad had an easy youth, and they had very little support financially or emotional from families, pretty well from the time they left school. They married young and had 5 kids over 10 years. But despite everything, they created a loving and supportive family. Dad was a man of deep integrity, hardworking and generous, who loved his family and sport, and I think in that order. He had a very busy working life to support us all, but also a very busy extracurricular life, mostly running rugby league in Brisbane. He always ended up being in charge. I suppose what we would have called a natural leader. People liked working with Dad, and they were able to get things done under his leadership. Dad was very charming. Mum was possibly maybe a little less charming, but very hardworking and very, very organised. Ensuring we all got the best possible education was important to them, and somehow they were able to send myself and my four younger brothers and sisters to private Catholic schools. All the girls went to St Rita's and the boys went to St Columban's, so we're pretty well represented here today. I mostly enjoyed school, but I learnt too that I had to work hard and be disciplined if I wanted to have the options after school. I had some amazing teachers, dedicated and occasionally deeply inspirational. I will particularly always remember Sister Canis, my English teacher in my last 2 years at school, and I credit Sister Canis with my lifelong love of Shakespeare, the theatre, and in fact in writing as well. And I certainly credit her with the top marks I got in my year 12. I should have possibly apologised to any teachers who might remember me from those days, particularly my maths teacher and my French teacher. They wrestled so hard to get me across the line. Maths I finally got, but unfortunately I still butcher French. I had expected, like a lot of girls in the 70s, to go to Teachers College after I left school. And my careers advisor had suggested this or being a nurse, neither of which really thrilled me, I must admit, with the deepest respect to all teachers and nurses. She didn't suggest a nun, but I know it was there in the background just in case. Instead, I did well enough, thanks to Sister Canis, and I think my maths teacher, to get a scholarship to go to the University of Queensland. And my goodness, that was a life changer. It opened up so many opportunities to me, and I suppose that was probably the time my life really changed. I was able to do an economics degree, and so by the time I finished, I was able to consider a career in business. When I finished university, what I wanted to do was work in aviation. But that was not possible in the 70s, as I was told that the only roles in airlines for women, because we only thought airlines, of course, were flight attendants or terminal staff, and that's not really what I aspired to. Nor were there many options in Brisbane generally for women in the consulting or the business firms. In fact, Brisbane in those days was very much a public service town, like many of the smaller state capitals were and in many ways still are. So I figured if I was going to work in the public service, I might as well try for Canberra. Getting out of Brisbane in those days was very attractive, and how things have changed. So I applied for the Commonwealth Public Service and was accepted into their graduate program, and I left Brisbane in the week after my 21st birthday in little Datsun 1600 or something, which my husband said was the death trap on wheels, and a couple of suitcases. But probably what I did take with me, which was much more important, were those values that I had grown up with: integrity, courage, determination, striving for excellence. I also had in front of me good role models of leadership, of hard-working, disciplined people who also pursued their passions. So I enjoyed my, 4 years in Canberra, but when I realised while I was moving around the departments, as you do as a graduate recruit, that they ran aviation, Qantas, TAA, hands up who remembers TAA, more than most. Air traffic control, airports, what's now CASA, all have run by the Department of Transport, or Transport Australia as was in those days. So it took me 2 years, but I finally got myself into that department and was working in the aviation section. 2 years later, I got myself to Sydney Airport on a transfer. I'd met my now husband in Canberra in that time. He was working in Sydney and flying with Qantas, which I thought was terribly exciting. So I did move to Sydney. The first job I got was at Sydney Airport. Now, I hadn't really ever thought about airports. I thought aviation was aeroplanes. Not that I wanted to fly. Never really, it was really back of house stuff that I liked. But an airport was close, and I figured once I got there, I could look further on. I was the first woman in any management job in an airport in Australia. So there was no role models, there was no support network, and more than one person who considered that I didn't have the skill set for that job, the assistant airport director, which was probably true, as I was only about 26 and had never put my foot on an airport or the back of house of an airport before. However, I was smart, I was eager to learn. Besides, the job description literally read, "Assist the airport director." How hard could it be? From that first day, I loved that job. And I didn't care if they said I didn't have enough skills. I was going to do this. I wanted to be there, and so I just got on with it. I asked for help. I learned quickly. I also found I was like my dad. I was good with people, and they seemed to like working with me. I had 60 middle-aged men working for me. They used to do all the work, booking the cars, towing them away and managing all the landside operations of the airport, and there they were working for this 26-year-old who'd never done any of this in her life. But I learned very rapidly about managing people and how to get a good performance from a team. The airport director had hired me as a part of a change program. I think I was the most dramatic thing he could do, the biggest change they could possibly imagine. But I was quite happy to take advantage of that, though I knew I had to deliver on the appointment. And as I said, I was good at the job. And in the subsequent 28 years I had at Sydney Airport, I think I was used many times as a change agent by various managers. They certainly pushed me into doing a lot of uncomfortable jobs that I didn't necessarily want to do, nor felt that I had the right experience for. But again, if you don't take risks, and you don't get those opportunities. So I took the jobs, and it made me learn quickly. I worked in security, emergency management, community relations, strategic planning, terminal management, and eventually, in my great love, planning, construction, and facilities management. I love running infrastructure. I like building things, and most importantly, I can do it in a way you can afford it. By the late 90s, I was responsible at Sydney Airport for expanding terminals, preparing Sydney for the airport for the Olympics, and for the introduction of the A380s. I was supervising the building of baggage systems, expanding and upgrading the security systems that were needed after 9/11 and the subsequent events. I also represented Sydney Airport in all the community and noise forums for several years after the parallel runway opened in Sydney in 1996. This was a major learning experience and one that has stood me in good stead over many years and through many different jobs. There are no easy answers to issues like airport noise for many people, but learning that you have to respect them and to listen to their concerns is vitally important and does allow, hopefully, to find some mitigation to help them through the consequences of having to live with these sort of things. I also got to meet and work with many of the current group of senior Sydney-based federal politicians, which has also been useful, as most of them are now major cabinet, if not in the top job. Sydney was and still is tough, or Sydney Airport is tough. It's surrounded by long-established communities, though they haven't been there as long as the airport has. It's only 900 hectares, which is small for a major airport, and it's crisscrossed with old utilities and services, sometimes over 100 years old. There's a sewer that runs through Sydney Airport, romantic thing, sewers. It's heritage listed. And I had to build a bridge over it that would take the weight of an A380, which we did. And we didn't break the sewer, which is good because if it broke, it was just going to flood into the Cook and the Georges River. It's gravity fed all the way to the outfalls. So we had to build over these old services, which still service large parts of eastern and southwestern Sydney. It made every construction job fraught, slow and expensive. The airport was privatised in 2002 and purchased by a consortium headed by Macquarie Bank. In those days, the Macquarie model was based on tight fiscal management, very, very high gearing, and maximum commercial expansion. It was considered the high-performance model for infrastructure assets in those days. It created great value for shareholders. I have an old colleague here in Brisbane who reckons he never made more money than out of his Sydney Airport shares. But it rarely made friends among our customers, both airlines and travellers, and we were not very popular due to the runway. So social licence was a concept that we really couldn't ever quite get to grips with at Sydney. My job, being the person who spent most of the money at Sydney Airport, was to thread a successful path through these challenges, to get the deals to pay for the infrastructure from the airlines, to ensure that the place had sufficient funds for maintenance and safety and security, all the while returning those high returns to the shareholders. I certainly learnt about risk management and how to present compelling cases to justify expenditure and to get airlines to agree. But the key to all of that ended up being you just had to be honest and transparent. The case often made itself, as long as you didn't try and sort of pull the wool over people's eyes, but explain it fairly and honestly. So mostly I was able to get the funds and the support for the various projects we needed. During those years, I married and I had a son in 1989. I received excellent support from my manager when I returned to work at Sydney Airport, though I did have to step away from operational roles. I could not be on call as my husband was away flying with Qantas in those early years and I needed to be at home. I got an opportunity, though, to work on a series of upgrade projects at the airport, all of which were mostly digital, and was my first real look at matters IT since I'd left university. So it was an extremely valuable time, but it also gave me time for my family commitments and provided those valuable learnings, which have stood me again in good stead once I came back into a more committed career trajectory. In 2009, I was granted the opportunity to return to Brisbane to take up the Managing Director CEO role at Brisbane Airport. My son by then had finished school, and my husband was keen for the change. Dad was still with us back then, and I took him and Mum on a tour of the airport, which is about 2,500 hectares, a little bit bigger than Sydney Airport. And he was very interested to find out what part of it I was going to run. When I told him it was all of it, I think he was truly appalled and thought that I may have bitten off more than I could chew. Thankfully, Dad lived for another couple of years, and I was able to show him that I could not only handle the challenge, but actually do a pretty good job. I thought that the great opportunity in coming to Brisbane Airport was to change the paradigm that had grown up around airports. Airports had got quite adversarial, I think probably the best word. Adversarial with their communities, adversarial with their customers. And that was not just Sydney. Sydney was probably peak adversary, but it was common cause, and including Brisbane Airport. But I wanted to change that paradigm. I thought if we could work in partnership with the airlines, with the city and with the community, we could provide that great airport and the aviation capacity that our community needed, while still remaining true to giving our shareholders that long-term value that they needed. Brisbane Airport was younger. It had been moved further away from the city. I think the nearest house to Brisbane Airport is well over 4 kilometres. The nearest house to the runway end at Sydney Airport is about 900 metres. So we didn't have quite the same issues. It was certainly newer and more functional infrastructure. We didn't have any of those old legacy problems of Sydney Airport. So I didn't have quite, as big a hole to deal as my colleagues down in Sydney have to deal. My board was mostly supportive, though the old Macquarie model was still considered gold standard. Though I think, looking now at probably the subsequent experience at Sydney Airport, particularly when the new airport option came up, showed that zero-sum game meant that when the times get tough, if you don't have friends and allies, you can't get things done. So, and I suppose it's that point in the difference of short-term value versus long-term value, what is more important in the end. Look, it took some time and there was some hard experience, and some of you probably still remember the Brisbane Late Again campaign with the Courier Mail. It was a tough experience. It probably wasn't as tough as I experienced in Sydney prior to the 2000 Olympics, but that's a different story. I suppose in the end you realise what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But I must admit, as a CEO, you always realise that when you do have those media campaigns, something's got to give at some point. Unfortunately, it's quite often the CEO is sacrificed. So I think, again, I'll have endless thanks to the board that supported me through that time, recognise that we did have the right longer-term answers to the problem of building that runway in Brisbane, but we needed the time and the space to do it. So I outlasted the Courier Mail, which is not something everyone can say. I had a straightforward vision for Brisbane Airport. It's really quite trite in many ways, to deliver excellence while creating value for the shareholders. And of course it is trite and it's not that simple. It covers every aspect of running an airport, starting with creating a safe and secure environment where everyone goes home safe each day, providing a good service to our customers, from making sure loos are clean to queues move quickly. It's building and maintaining functional, attractive and cost-effective facilities, and working cooperatively with the government and the community while still meeting those fairly substantial financial targets that both our equity and debt partners required. And of course, very little of this is done by the CEO. Your job is just to turn up and make sure people do their job. My real job was to ensure that vision for Brisbane Airport was strongly communicated over and over and over again, and then to build that strong culture of performance and innovation within the corporation to deliver that vision. I needed to build a strong team and then provide them with the space and the resources to get on with doing what was needed and what they were then hired to do. During my time at Brisbane Airport, it was rated the best airport in Australasia 3 times, 3rd best in Asia Pacific for our size, and it has been included in the top 20 airports in the world by Skytrax since 2016. I was also able to get that $1.3 billion runway approved, funded, and the construction started. It did finish just after I left, on time and under budget. Mega projects do not have to fail. I decided in 2018 it was time to go after 9 years. I felt that Brisbane Airport needed a refreshed vision and a new energy. And after 40 years in airports, I didn't think anymore I was that person. And I was certainly sure that I could not cope with another aero pricing round, nor the inevitable noise complaints after that runway went into service. I had done 10 years of that at Sydney. I didn't want to do another 10 in Brisbane. So I moved on to being a non-executive director, but working in very different areas that were mostly new to me, and in all areas that were undergoing disruption and change. I've had an enormous amount to learn over the last 7 years, and I'm still learning every day. I have worked on boards since about 1998, when I first joined the board of Airports Corporation Australia, which I ended up chairing for 6 years. We allocated the slots at Sydney Airport, so if anybody reads about Sydney Airport every now and then realises that that was a challenging gig then, and it's still hard now. I also started my first not-for-profit back in 2003 as a board member for my son's school in Sydney Airport. And my goodness, did I get to learn to respect teachers and particularly principals. I think it's the hardest job I've seen until I joined the board at the Senate at UQ and saw what a Vice-Chancellor has to do. While I was at Brisbane Airport, I was able to take on several roles, but all roles that were related to or associated with my role at the airport. I worked on the board of the Tourism and Events Queensland, the Australia Trade Coast, probably Queensland Theatre Company, not so aligned, but we were a sponsor, and I was able to join Infrastructure Australia at that time. I think my successful C-suite role at BAC, as well as being the chair of IA, which I became in 2018, gave me a platform to get other boards. I had a national profile in infrastructure. Also, I must admit, being a Queenslander and a woman did not help. I still get phone calls looking for Queenslanders to be on board, so let me know afterwards if you're interested. I was offered the Senate at the University of Queensland, ERM, which is a power retailer, and Queensland Ballet in quick order. So from a standing start of one board, I had 4 within a few months. ERM was ASX, so it was a very good experience, not one I'm keen to repeat. But we were able to organise a very successful sale to Shell, and I left there as chair with the deep thanks of our various shareholders. I was able to replace ERM with WATPAC and then with Guardior, which is a trustee fund for infrastructure fund, and I'm back working with my old colleagues from Mac Bank on that board. I left Infrastructure Australia after 6 years, a frustrating 6 years, but that's again another story. And now I'm on the board of the Australian Energy Market Operator, and my goodness, is that interesting. It is probably the most fascinating job I've had since I first joined Sydney Airport. I'm now, after 7 years as a non-executive director, in another stage of my life, where I'm now looking to reduce my workload, mostly for family reasons and to allow time for some more travel, making up for those COVID years. So I've now finished with WATPAC and with the ballet, though I have taken on a couple of small advisory roles. So I've still got my 3 boards and a couple of other things, so I'm not exactly out of work just yet. So what have I learnt over these years, and what's important about good leadership? I think the first thing and the thing that comes to mind always for me is integrity. Integrity is vitally important, and in my experience, you're unlikely to be successful in the longer term if you lack integrity and are not trustworthy. You are defined by those values as you live them. I think humility is very important. It's always about the team, not you. Good things can happen on your watch, but only if you have a good team. You don't have all the answers, and you don't have all the time to make the decisions, and boy, if you do, you're probably out of there in a very short while. You need to be courageous. You need to take risks and don't be afraid to ask for help. Good risk management skills are vital if you are going to take these risks. There's a theory that the best CEOs are pessimists. They expect things to go wrong and prepare for that eventuality. I've certainly learned that over the years. Things that can go wrong will, and you better be prepared for it. You need to have clarity of vision and to be able to communicate it well. And as I said, communicate it over and over and over. And if they're sick of it, they're probably only just starting to listen to you. Your team should be in no doubt of what they need to deliver. So you don't need to micromanage them, though you do need to want to know what's happening back. No surprises was always my mantra. People are important, probably the most important thing you'll do, but people are hard. So work on the skills you need to manage as part of your role and get really good people to support you. I only met weekly with 2 of my direct reports at Brisbane Airport, my HR manager and my corporate relations manager, the 2 areas where it was most likely to go wrong and most often go wrong. It's important to treat people with respect, your colleagues, your customers, even your competitors. Australia is a painfully small world, and your reputation is important, and those you hurt on the way up may see you on the way back down. The customer focus, I think, is vitally important, but also you need to strive and gain your social licence. And if you can get it, work really hard to keep it, because once you lose it, it's dreadfully hard, brutally hard to recover from. I think it's important to be curious and to seek to learn and challenge yourself. Besides, you always find work more interesting if you take the time to understand how it all works, why it is being done, and to get to know the people you're working with. Financial literacy is vital for you and for your staff, and if you have any engineers, make sure they understand the balance sheet. And nowadays, of course, just for the hell of it, you've got to be digitally literate as well. So what have I learned as a board director? It's getting harder, and the focus on compliance can be almost overwhelming. Cyber, ESG, workplace safety, financial management. I'm a responsible manager. Just to keep that current alone, the training is significant. Ensuring correct pay to staff is taking up more and more time, and now we have environmental reportings. And I'm often grateful that I have had operational experience in some of these issues because it does help. It's important to remember that board tenure can be unpredictable. Governments change, companies get sold, get taken over. So if you're building a portfolio, you've got to be prepared for that to change. It'll take much more time than you expect. It's also interesting, but I do recommend you move into areas that aren't necessarily the things you've always done before. It's an opportunity to keep learning and growing, and that's so important. There's a great demand for not-for-profits, and they do provide good experience, but don't take on too many at one time. They're often a lot of hard work, and you end up working very long hours with no pay and lots of risk, particularly when times get tough. I think being with QB during COVID was probably one of the hardest experiences of my life. You need to learn to say no. It's so easy to take on too much, and it's all interesting, and it's often quite flattering. But when things go wrong, which they usually do, the workload can get absolutely out of control. So if you've got a lot of boards, it's very, very difficult. And what else have I learned that's not necessarily directly related to commercial things in this busy life of mine? I've learnt that my family is the greatest strength, and without their support, life would be much harder and colder. You need to keep a focus on your health and fitness, because without your health, you can't do any of the things you want to do. You need to be patient. It's the long haul. I became a CEO at 54, and at 70, I still expect to have a few more years as a NED. I have taken time out at various periods to focus on what is important, sometimes family, sometimes travel, sometimes study. And I've absolutely no regrets in doing this. I still made it to the top in the end. And probably the last thing I'd mention about careers and things is timing is important. You can outstay your welcome. Plan for the future, and if possible, choose your own time to go. Now, I was also asked to speak a little bit about 2032 and what we can expect and hope for. Being in Sydney for the Sydney Olympics in 2000 was a great experience, though the year before that was fairly brutal for the organisers, as there was daily adverse media coverage on most aspects of the Games, including the airport. If I remember correctly, I think Monday was the venues wouldn't be ready, Tuesday the rail system would fail, Wednesday the airport baggage system, which was having problems, was going to let us all down. And I forget what Thursday was, and I think on Friday they started back on the venues. And it was for months and months and months. And it went right up until the day before the Games started. And when that flame lifted up with Kathy sitting underneath it, and it all went well, which was touch and go at the time, for those of you who remember, that was the end of it. Sydney was party town, and it was party town until after the Paras, and the goodwill and the fun was absolutely invigorating. It was fantastic. But oh my goodness, what a tough 6 months before it all happened. The infrastructure built for the Sydney Games was a genuine boom for Sydney, both before and after the events. It created jobs leading up to the Games and provided stimulus afterwards. The improved transport connections, the new sporting facilities, the upgrade of the airport and the rail systems are all important. Plus, the enhanced reputation of Sydney and Australia and the tourism spin-offs were very, very valuable, though unfortunately September 11 did slow that momentum down somewhat. So if we do get the transport and the communications improvement that the Council of South East Queensland Mayors originally planned as the basis for the bid of the Games, we will achieve the type of legacy that makes the bid valuable. The conurbation of the 5 southeast East Queensland cities, connected by improved transport and digital links, would set us up for a wonderful period of growth in the southeast, but growth that will allow us to meet our enviable lifestyle without having that density of living that we see nowadays in Sydney and to a certain extent Melbourne. If we can achieve a zero carbon aim of the Games, or at least strive for it, we'll also create a legacy of good planning and delivery of projects, especially in the respect of things like urban water, energy, and hopefully learning how to cool our cities as we go into an increased temperature environment. The Paras are also a game changer, as it drives a wide range of accessibility improvements through many, many facilities in the community. Plus, the impact of seeing those extraordinary people overcoming their various disabilities to achieve extraordinary things provides such a brilliant role model for our local communities. And finally, there is the legacy of improved sporting facilities and venues, which hopefully will go well beyond SEQ. And let's face it, the Gabba's had its day. So 2032, I believe, is a great opportunity, but the real legacy will be in both how we change our cities for the better over the next 8 years and beyond, and how we can enhance the reputation in Queensland as a great place to live, work and to visit. Thank you.